Dixie here. I've been given some pretty bad backpacking advice in the almost 10 years or so that I have been a long distance backpacker. So I assume y'all have probably heard some of it too.
Bad advice! You gave me bad advice!
I decided to compile some of the things that I've heard, and I also reached out to some of my fellow backpackers on social media just to kind of compile this advice for y'all. So here is some of the worst advice that's been floating around the backpacking community. The first one, and probably my biggest pet peeve bad advice, is 2 is 1 and 1 is none, or specifically, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. I have seen this posted countless times in the comments of my backpacking videos, and while in certain instances, like in the prepper community, this makes complete sense, while backpacking, it just does not. This sentiment encourages carrying things that you probably will not use and or don't need while you're backpacking, which contributes to your pack being extremely overweight and could cause injury to you while you're out backpacking. Instead of carrying everything but the kitchen sink in case you might need it, it makes much more sense to focus on bringing along items that cover your basic necessities of life while you're going to be out on this backpacking trip. You definitely want to make sure that you're safe and comfortable, but I would focus more on having items that serve a dual purpose than bringing along additional items for redundancies. The only thing that I make an exception for is water treatment. I typically have with me some sort of redundancy because I am somebody who cooks food while I'm backpacking. I have a food pot and fuel and a stove. You could use wood and fire as long as you have something to boil water in. But that way there is some sort of backup plan if something happens to my water filter, which is my primary source. Fancy. My go-to is a water filter, but in the instance that it breaks or is frozen, which both things have happened to me on trail, or for some reason I feel like it's compromised, I have the ability to boil water. And this is more because my stove and food pot and fuel serve as a multi-purpose item. They're my source to make food, but also I can boil water if I need some sort of backup water treatment. Water treatment is one of those things that I feel like is a good idea to have some sort of backup plan. Next is never take your shoes off while backpacking during the day, because your feet will swell so much that you won't be able to get your shoes back on. This apparently came from somebody who was in the German military, and while I'm sure they meant well, the opposite of this advice is what's actually best practice for when backpacking. Allowing your feet to air dry, taking your shoes off, socks off, sometimes even removing your insoles so that everything can get good and aired out while you're taking a lunch break or something like that, can help reduce your risk of blisters and foot funk like trench foot. So definitely air out the dogs during the day, maybe even multiple times. And on this note of advice from military members, here's another one. If it's good enough for the military, it's good enough for me. This is usually said in reference to using military gear for backpacking instead of more lightweight gear intended for backpacking. I've seen folks hiking in military boots or Gore-Tex boots, using rucksacks from the military, because they can get this gear at a much better price a lot of times, especially if they're somebody who has been in the military and already has this stuff, than going out and buying lighter weight backpacking gear. And sometimes people even use this to defend like how heavy their pack is, because, well, if the military folks can carry pounds and pounds of weight, then, you know, I can too. What these people should keep in mind, though, is that the military has to tote a lot of weight. When you're out on a backpacking trip, you don't have to make yourself suffer. Like, you can actually lighten your load and just enjoy your trip. Also, the military is mainly comprised of younger soldiers, So the military in general is not really focusing on longevity. And if you want to be able to backpack for years to come, then you've got to take care of your body. You don't see very many 80-year-olds in the military rucking, and there's probably a reason for that. And finally, chronic injuries and osteoarthritis is actually a pretty big issue for people who have served in the military. In fact, after returning to civilian life, veterans who are over the age of 40 are twice as likely to develop arthritis. So anyway, I would look at the results of being in the military and what these people go through before you decide what's good enough for the military is good enough for me. And to be honest, most of the men that I have seen that have gotten out of the military and they are now on their freedom hike, growing their freedom beard, some of them may have started off with that military issued gear just because it's what they had and they didn't have to buy anything else. But most of the time you see those folks transitioning to more lightweight backpacking gear because they realize, you know, trail runners are more comfortable than army boots, and the rucksack itself is much more heavy than a lightweight backpack. And if you don't have to carry a bunch of weight and you can be more comfortable, then why not? Next is, it's not supposed to rain, so you won't need your rain gear. I'm always going to carry my rain jacket, even on a summer trip when it's not supposed to rain, because you just never know. Especially if you're hiking in the mountains, weather can change in an instant, and at higher elevations, it can get cold very quickly. So having a rain jacket is one of those dual purpose pieces of gear, because not only is it good protection from the rain, but also the wind. It can be another layer to help trap in heat if you find yourself getting cold. So having that piece of equipment is just like a constant in my pack. Next, saving weight should be your priority. While I think that trimming weight from your pack and making sure it's not so heavy that you're miserable will definitely make you enjoy yourself more, everyone has to find that sweet spot for them in comfort and pack weight, because it seems that to have the more comfortable gear, a lot of times that means to have heavier gear, and to have the more lightweight stuff means sometimes you're sacrificing something in comfort. So you really have to find that perfect point for you where you are not carrying so much during the day that you're uncomfortable while hiking, but also you're carrying enough to where when you get to camp, you actually enjoy yourself there and you're not like freezing to death or just, you know, sleeping straight on the ground without any kind of insulation or padded comfort. There are definitely some pretty extreme ultralighters who would say that being as lightweight as possible is their priority. And for them, they're willing to deal with a little bit more at night to make sure they're more comfortable during the day. So even they have that sweet spot. For us backpacking YouTubers who you see reviewing gear, we do put a lot of focus on weight and price of an item, because those are things that you can be very objective about. When you get into things like comfort, that's way more subjective and you can't be objective about those things. So that's why when I talk about a piece of gear, I do talk about the comfort and how I feel like it served me and what my preferences are, because something that might be a deal breaker to me or, you know, feels like a home run piece of gear might be the complete opposite for somebody else watching the video, and I don't want them going out and wasting a bunch of money just because I swore that this is the best thing ever. So I typically like to talk about why it worked well for me or why it did not, and then express to people, you know, you have to figure out what works for you. And that's why our gear lists seem to be constantly changing and just like a living document, because the fun part is figuring out what works for you and experimenting with new pieces of gear. This next piece of advice is anything that an REI employee recommends. This one tickled me. While it's not fair to say that there are no REI employees that have experience with backpacking, I do understand where this one is coming from. Just because you work at REI does not mean that you have a ton of experience backpacking, especially like through hiking and long distance backpacking. I never worked for REI, but I did work for a large corporate outdoor store, and I can definitely say that a lot of the employees are going to have knowledge that specifically comes from these corporations to sell the gear, not coming from a specific place of personal experience. So a lot of these employees at REI are probably operating off of some of the old beliefs, like you've got to have hiking boots if you're going hiking. And also they typically don't sell the most lightweight backpacking gear at REI because they don't sell any of the cottage company gear. Now, we have said that, we all agree that weight is not the most important thing. And I do feel like they have some quality, especially starter gear at REI. And I love their policy of, if you're a member, then you can, use a piece of gear. And if you don't like it, you have up to a year to return it, even if it's used. But you definitely have to watch what you're getting there, and in any sort of recommendation from an employee, I would try to fill them out without coming across as a jerk, what type of experience they have compared to what activity you're wanting to do. The next piece of bad advice that was mentioned is you don't have to train for through hiking a trail. The trail will train you itself. I have definitely said this before, and I do realize that this is not the most sound piece of advice for everybody out there. I do think, however, that there have been several backpackers on YouTube who have put their stories out there, or bloggers or whatever, just showing that they were not in great shape before starting their through hikes. And through pure determination and grit, they were able to overcome and really did get into pretty good physical condition through backpacking a long distance trail. But I think the important part of this is they gave themselves time to go slow, to listen to their body, and to slowly acclimate as they pushed through their through hiking journey. So I really only think this is bad advice if you don't give yourself that extra built-in time to allow your body to adjust to the through hike as you go forward. But with that said, I have also recognized that the best practice is for sure to be in the best shape that you can possibly be in before you get out there. So training, exercising, lifting weights, doing cardio, all of that stuff will definitely help you. Even rucking around your neighborhood with your pack on, any amount of physical activity and the best shape that you can be in when you start on that start line for your through hike will definitely put you in a better position to succeed. But the truth is, you are not going to be in through hiking condition unless you are literally out on a trail every day, putting in miles and miles and miles. But the best shape that you can be in will definitely help you adjust to that lifestyle out on trail. Next is wait for someone to go with you. Don't solo hike. While I definitely understand that there is a safety aspect to backpacking in a group, I think that telling somebody to wait for other people to live and enjoy their life and chase their dreams is absolutely terrible advice. You are responsible for achieving your goals and dreams. Do not give that power to somebody else. And from a safety standpoint, you can always take precautions and mitigate being alone. Let somebody know where you're going, what your plan is. Carry something like a personal locator beacon so you can call for help if you need it. If you are through hiking, pick one of the more populated trails like the Appalachian Trail, where you're likely to have other people around you during the day while you're hiking and also while you're camping, even though you are technically a solo hiker. Have some sort of personal protection or have self-defense training. But I beg you, please do not let the fear of being alone stop you from living. The next bad piece of advice is you don't need a personal locator beacon or emergency device. It's just a day hike. Well, the folks who tend to need search and rescue the most are day hikers. It's not uncommon for folks to go on just a day hike and end up disoriented, turned around, and oftentimes they are not as prepared as backpackers because they weren't planning to overnight. They weren't planning to stay out there for the night. They were planning to go back to their car and to their house and be comfortable for the night. And a lot of times day hikers don't take the 10 essentials of hiking, even though that is preached and preached and preached. So they're just not in a position where they're prepared to overnight. And so really, that's like the prime candidate for carrying an inReach device or some other device that you could call for emergency help, personal locator, beacon, spot, etc. Next is any old leaf will do. Now, I have to feel like this one is a joke, but all joking aside, it is a great idea to be able to identify the poisonous plants for where you're going hiking. That way, if you end up in a bind with no toilet paper, you don't use the wrong leaf to wipe and just really mess yourself up. And finally, I just had to make kind of like a whole bad footwear advice category because I got several comments that fit the bad footwear advice. First, try Altras. I had to laugh when I read that one because I have definitely talked about Altras on this channel multiple times and how much I love them, why they work well for my feet, but that's the key there, is why they work well for me. And in all of those videos, I definitely recognize that a specific footwear is not going to work for everybody, and that's why there are so many options out there. In fact, I have several members of my family that have gone hiking or backpacking with me or have asked for shoe advice, and my mom absolutely loved her Altras when we went out to the PCT to fill in the fire closure areas, and they worked great for her. My brother Dakota joined me during my through hike of the CDT, and I was kind of pushed for time, so I was doing bigger miles. His body did not agree with those bigger miles and a zero drop shoe, so he ended up with strained Achilles and Achilles tendonitis, and his feet were kind of in a mess for a little while with that combination. My sister Montana, who went out to the Camino de Santiago with me, she did not do well with Altras and ended up with plantar fasciitis. But on the flip side of that, my husband Rodney used Altras for the first time on Kilimanjaro. He didn't really love some things about them, but has since in regular life, not using the Altras, developed plantar fasciitis, and he's like, maybe I should go back to Altras and try those in everyday life. And they have helped his plantar fasciitis tremendously, go into that zero drop shoe. So everybody is very different and their tolerance of the zero drop. So I would just say that you're going to have to play around with it and figure out what works for you. And this is why it would be great to be an REI member, because then, like I mentioned before, you have up to a year to return a piece of gear that you purchased from them, even if you've worn it and it does not work out for you. So that way you're not sinking thousands of dollars into trying a bunch of different types of trail runners. You can try some. If it doesn't work, you send it back and you get something else. The next bad footwear advice that somebody mentioned is you have to have hiking boots to go hiking. This is so outdated, it's just not even funny. Unless you are in like super cold, snowy conditions, or you are going to be wearing crampons, so you need a shoe that has rigidity to it, or you have a medical reason that a doctor has told you, you need to wear hiking boots instead of trail runners, then I challenge you to try trail runners instead of boots. They are more lightweight, less clunky, more breathable. They're going to dry faster. But for all the folks who are like, well, I need the ankle stability, let's kind of dig into that a little bit, because this idea that boots offer so much more ankle stability is really just kind of speculation. You might think that boots would offer more ankle support, but there was actually a small study done with some PE students where they were jumping onto different surfaces with high top shoes and then low top shoes. Several measurements were taken, and basically it was concluded that the high top shoes actually caused a delay in reaction. And so the study concluded that some preliminary evidence was found that high top shoes can have a detrimental effect on establishing and maintaining functional ankle joint stability. While these studies tend to be small, so you can't consider it settled science, the idea that you need hiking boots to give your ankles more stability and prevent injuries while hiking is also not settled science. And if you take a look at the end of the year Thru-hiker surveys, it's shown year after year that hikers tend to swap from boots to trail runners much more than they would ever swap from trail runners to boots, and there is a reason for that. You should also know that there was a study amongst Army soldiers that showed during PT that wearing a minimalist shoe versus like a traditional Army shoe, the folks who wore the minimalist shoe actually performed better, and wearing the minimalist shoe was not associated with more injuries. And the last piece of bad footwear advice is you're gonna have to break those shoes in. If you're having to break in hiking shoes, then you have put the wrong shoes for you on your feet. There should be no reason that you have to break them in, and when you put them on and you start hiking, they should be good to go and comfortable. I would say there might be a couple of minor exceptions to this. First being, if you're not used to a zero drop shoe and you decide to get a zero drop shoe like an Ultra, then it might be a good idea to wear them around town or on some shorter hikes before you jump into something like a long distance hike. But this is less about breaking in the shoe and more about stretching your body out and getting it used to this design. And the second exception I would say here is leather boots. They probably do need broken in, and that's just another argument for why you should try trail runners instead of boots, at least for 3-season backpacking. Well, all right, y'all, that is all I have for you today on bad advice that you've probably heard. If you've got other bad advice you've heard floating around the backpacking community, I would love for you to drop that in the comments below. It's just kind of fun for me to hear some of the things that people have said. Thank y'all so much for watching. If you found this video useful, don't forget to share with a friend, and we will see y'all next time.